All right, moving on to part 2 of our lesson today. We're going to learn how to multiply by multiples of tens, hundreds, and thousands. So we're going to begin by solving the following multiplication problem. Make sure to copy this screen into your notebook. Let's start by multiplying 24 times 3. So off to the side on your notebook, multiply 24 times 3 and then submit your answer and we'll go over it together. 24 times 3 is 72. Now let's look at how we can solve 24 times 3,000. I already know that 24 times 3 is 72, so I can write 72 down. That, however, doesn't account for the place value. That's just 24 times 3, right? I want to multiply 24 times 3,000, so I have to account for the place value. If I'm multiplying times 3,000s, I have to account for the place value in my answer as well. So my answer is going to be 72 thousandths. I have to add the 3 zeros. 24 times 3,000 equals 72,000. Let's go over the steps that we did to solve this problem. I was first able to look at my non-zero digits, the 24 and the 3, and multiply them together. Once when I had that 24 times 3 is 72, I was then able to take a look at the place value and add that into my answer. Solve the following multiplication problem and then submit your answer. 16 times 7. 16 times 7 is 112. Now let's take a look at how this problem would change if I was multiplying 16 times 700. Remember, you've already multiplied 16 times 7. Now all you need to do is account for the place value. Write your answer in your notebook and then submit it here when you're ready. We already know that 16 times 7 is 112. Now we have to take a look at the place value, right? It's not just 16 times 7, it's 16 times 7 hundredths. So I have to take a look at the place value and add that into my answer. If I'm multiplying times 7 hundredths, that means that 112 is 112 hundredths. So I have to add 2 zeros to my answer. Now I can add the comma and read it correctly. 16 times 700 equals 11,200. Let's use what we just learned to solve a few problems. Write these down in your notebook. I'm going to do the first one with you, and then you'll try the others on your own and submit your answer. 485 times 30. I'm going to start by taking a look at my non-zero digits and multiplying. So I'm going to begin by multiplying 485 times 3. Okay, let's see what we should have gotten here. 5 times 3 is 15, carry the 1. 8 times 3 is 24, plus 1 is 25, so we should have written down a 5 and carried the 2. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. So 485 times 3 is 1,455. I can write that down, but remember, that's just 485 times 3. It's not 485 times 30. Now I have to account for the place value. I wanted to multiply it times 30, not 3. So I'm going to need to add a 0 into my answer. Then I can add the comma and read my answer correctly, 14,550. All right, now I want you to try 485 times 300 on your own. Remember, we already multiplied 485 times 3, so you don't need to do that again. We already know that that's 1,455. What you have to do here is take a close look at the place value and make sure that you are accounting for it correctly in your answer. Again, we know 485 times 3 is 1,455. But this time I want to multiply times 300. So I'm going to add 2 zeros into my answer before adding the comma and being able to read the problem correctly. 145,500. Now try 485 times 3,000. Once again, we already know that 485 times 3 is 1,455, but this time I was multiplying it times 3,000. I have 3 zeros, so I'm going to add 3 zeros into my answer. I can add the other comma and then be able to read the problem correctly. 1,455,000. Okay, we're going to go a step further here. Now, as you can see in this problem, I have two numbers that both are multiples of 10, right? I have 45,000 times 60. I'm going to solve this really the same way that we did the previous ones. I'm going to take a look at my non-zero digits first, and then I'm going to account for the place value later. So let's begin by multiplying 45 times 6. Okay, let's see what we should have gotten. 5 times 6 is 30, so I write the 0, carry the 3. 6 times 4 is 24, plus 3 is 27. So 45 times 6 is 270. Now we know that 45,000 times 60 is not 270, right? I have to account for the place value. So I'm going to begin by taking a look at the first factor. I have 3 zeros in the first factor, so I have to make sure that I have those 3 zeros in my product as well. But I have another factor as well. I have 6 tens, which means that I have to add another 0 to my answer. Now that I've accounted for all of the place values, I can add my commas and read the number accurately. 2,700,000. All right, let's try another one. 45,000 times 600. Do this one on your own and submit your answer when you're ready. Well, we already know that 45 times 6 was 270. And then I have to account for my place value. I have 3 zeros in the first factor, so I'm going to add my 3 zeros in. I have 2 zeros because it's 600 in my second factor, so I have to add those as well. Now I can add my commas. Remember to always count from the right when you're adding your commas. There's 3 digits in each period. And then we can read it accurately. 27 million. And the last one here is 45,000 times 6,000. Solve it in your notebook and then submit your answer when you're ready. Again, 45 times 6 is 270. I'm going to take a look at the first factor, and I have 3 zeros, so I have to add 3 zeros in my answer. Now I have to take a look at the second factor. I'm multiplying times 6,000, which has 3 zeros in it. So my answer has to have 3 more zeros in order to become 1,000 times greater. Now I can add my commas and read the number, 270 million. Let's take a look at another way to get the answer that's a little bit more streamlined. Once again, you'd start by multiplying 45 times 6, which is 270, and we'd write that down. Next, we can take a look at the zeros. I have 1 zero in my second factor and 3 zeros in my first factor. Altogether, I have 4 zeros. I can add 4 zeros into my answer before adding the comma and reading it as 2,700,000. So I multiplied my non-zero digits, and then I looked at the amount of place values I had and added them into my answer. Taking a look at the second example and doing the same thing, again, 45 times 6 is 270. This time I have 3 zeros in the first factor and 2 zeros in the second factor. Altogether, that's 5 zeros. So I have to account for that many place values, adding it into my product before I add my commas. And the final one, 45,000 times 6,000. Same thing, I take a look at my non-zero digits first and write down 270, and then I account for the place value. I have 3 zeros in the first factor and 3 zeros in the second factor, for a total of 6 zeros. So I'm going to add those 6 zeros into my answer before adding the commas and reading it as 270 million. So one way to multiply multiples of 10, hundreds, and thousands mentally is to multiply the non-zero digits and then take a look at the place value, the number of zeros in each factor, and add them into your answer. This is the final practice of this lesson. We're going to do 2 problems together, and then you're going to do 4 problems to practice on your own. Please copy these down into your notebook and copy them exactly as I solve them. I'm going to be showing you a very helpful strategy that can help prevent mistakes when solving these problems mentally. Make sure you have a highlighter handy because we will be using it. Okay, so to begin, I'm going to take a look at my non-zero digits, my 2 and my 5. I can multiply 2 times 5 in my head, which is 10. So I'm going to write that down and I'm going to highlight it because I got 10 by multiplying 2 times 5. So if you take a look at the highlighting, you can kind of read it from left to right, and it makes sense. 2 times 5 equals 10. Next, I'm going to take a look at the place value. I have 2 zeros in the first factor and 3 zeros in the second factor. So altogether, I should have 5 zeros in my answer. Now I can add my comma and then box my answer. 200 times 5,000 equals 1 million. All right, let's do one more together. Again, let's highlight the 6 and the 9. Those are my non-zero digits. I'll begin by multiplying 6 times 9, which is 54. And again, it's highlighted, and it should make sense reading just the highlighted part from left to right. 6 times 9 equals 54. But remember, it's not just 6 times 9. We're doing 600 times 9,000. So we have to account for the place value. In the first factor, I have 2 zeros, and in the second factor, I have 3 zeros. Altogether, I have 5 zeros. So I'm going to add those into my answer. Now I can add the commas and box my answer. 600 times 9,000 is 5,400,000. Try this one on your own, but I do want you to write it in your notebook and use your highlighter. Show your work just as I've done in numbers 1 and 2. Submit your answer when you're ready to go over it. To begin, we highlight 8 times 6. 8 times 6 is 48. Next, I'm going to take a look at the place value. 800 has 2 zeros in it, and 60,000 has 4 zeros in it. So my answer should account for all of those place values. I have a total of 6 zeros, so I'm going to add 6 zeros into my answer before adding my commas and boxing it. 800 times 60,000 is 48 million. Solve 500 times 20,000 in your notebook. Again, make sure to use your highlighter and show your work. Once again, we should start by highlighting our non-zero digits. 5 times 2 equals 10, and I highlight it. And this is a perfect example of why this strategy can be so helpful. What do you think is a common error when people don't highlight that 10 there? You see the 0, right? So many people accidentally count the 0 and the 10 as one of the place values from the 500 or the 20,000. Again, using this strategy as we're learning can help prevent simple errors like those. Okay, back to the problem. 5 times 2 is 10. Now we can account for the place value. I have 2 zeros in 500 and 4 zeros in 20,000. Altogether, that's 6 zeros. So I'm going to need to add 6 zeros into my answer to account for the place value. 500 times 20,000 is 10 million. Try 40,000 times 600. The 4 and the 6 should be highlighted on your paper, and we multiply those together to get 24. Next, we're going to take a look at the place value. 40,000 has 4 zeros, 600 has 2 zeros. Altogether, that's 6 zeros that we need to account for when writing our final answer. So I'm going to add 6 zeros, add my commas, and box my answer. 40,000 times 600 is 24 million. Final problem, try 2,000 times 500,000. 2 and 5 should be highlighted, which equals 10. So I have 3 zeros in 2,000 and 5 zeros in 500,000. Altogether, that's 8 zeros. So I'm going to need to add 8 zeros into my answer. I can add my commas and box it for an answer of 1 billion. Nice job. That's the end of our lesson today.